Good afternoon, good afternoon. Welcome, students, to our first Future Friday session as part of our Career Development Month. We have a number of activities. Some of you would have been a part of our Transformation Tuesday session on developing your brand in the online environment, the virtual professional environment. And today, we are going to continue our sessions. We have with us today, Mr. Anthony Paul. Mr. Paul is an energy and strategy advisor who works to bring economic justice to owners of petroleum resources. He bridges the gap between parties by drawing on an understanding of the values and modus operandi of governments and multinational investors derived from over 40 years of deep and varied experience on both sides. In that time, he has held technical, commercial, management, and leadership roles spanning the entire petroleum exploration and production value chain in the government and national oil company of his home country, Trinidad and Tobago, as well as multinational companies Exxon, Amoco, and BP. This he has brought to the assistance of dozens of countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Central and Southern Asia. He is currently advising the governments of Mozambique, Senegal, and Guyana. Anthony Paul holds a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Imperial College of London and a Master's of Science in Geophysics from the University of Houston, Texas. So speaking to us today about making that essential pivot, which we make in our career exploration and career landscaping, moving forward in this new era, I want to hand you over today to Mr. Anthony Paul. Welcome, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Kathy-Ann, and good afternoon to students listening in. It's a pleasure to be here sharing some time with you. I am actually sitting in Maputo, Mozambique, and so I'm 6 hours ahead of you, but it's great to spend some time. As you would have seen from the invitations, I'm here to speak to you about career opportunities, but also preparing yourself for a new world. Kathy-Ann introduced me very briefly, and what I want to, I've been given 3 topics to speak about. Providing a global view of the job market for graduates, for you when you finish your programs. Provide you with some advice that will mitigate the anxiety that you associate with the current situation in the world and the region around the pandemic, economic changes, jobs, and then of course discussing the skills and competencies that you need to succeed as you pivot. Now, let me say it and get it over with. Pivot, pivot, pivot. I don't use current cliches. So as I'm doing that, let me say the other one. Agile, agile, agile. So there, I've ticked my academic box. I've done the cliches, right? Now, I'm not an academic. I don't use cliches, but I don't use current cliches. I also follow rules, but I don't constrain myself to rules. So although we have 3 issues to address here, I will address them, but not necessarily in that order. I know the key thing for you is what jobs are there out there. But even if you know what's there, how do you prepare yourself with? What's more important? And what I want to share with you is that it's not just what's there, it's what can be created. So what may be available to you may not be available now. And I use a cliche. I say, the future is not what it used to be. We had a sense of how things might be. That sense is turned upside down. Yeah, so I will go about this by doing 3 things. I will speak a little bit about my experiences, and my experiences have been rich and varied, and I've changed direction many times. So I've pivoted. I've had to make choices. And I want to share with you some of those choices, some of those changes, and the lessons I learned from them. And those lessons I hope can help you understand how to deal in these circumstances. And after that, I would really like to have a conversation around the way forward, the job opportunity, the market. And this is meant to be interactive as a session. The question is, what do you make of all this, and why might it be useful? And one of the things that has helped me, I found, and my children laughed at me all the time, said, Daddy, you remember trivia, you remember small things. But actually, what is interesting is that as we go through life, everything we do is related to something. Everything we see has an impact on something else. And in my role, I am a geologist by training and a geophysicist. And we look at pieces of evidence of rocks, of squiggles on paper called seismic lines. And we have these bits and pieces of information that may be miles below the earth, and have to put together a cohesive story of how rocks were formed, how they moved over time, how they were deformed. So we have to actually put together a 4-dimensional story, 3-dimensional spatially, and a time dimension of things change with limited data. It means you have to connect dots. You have to find relationships between things. And I find that useful, not only in geology, but in most things. And Katyan mentioned that the work I do is to bring experiences from my life in oil and gas to governments who I want to help get more from the oil and gas. And it's connecting those dots that make it make my work so useful. And I have to tell you, the experiences I bring were almost entirely developed, not all, in Trinidad and Tobago. And the skills I got, the lessons I learned that got me out here came from things that you would have gone through. We don't recognize these things until later on. So I'll quickly walk through some experiences that I had in my time to see where I got there and what I learned from them. So I went to primary. I was born and grew up in St. James in Port of Spain in North Trinidad. I went to school at Woodbrook Presbyterian School. Many of you would have seen it if you went on the Western Main Road next to Roxy Cinema, Pizza Hut, that place there. That school has been shut down for years and not being repaired. Nobody knows about it, nobody cares about it. But my best friend in school is now a professor of medicine at in gastroenterology and hepatology at Johns Hopkins University. For my brashness, I was sitting in lessons with my elder sister, and I was sitting in there because she had to take me home and I couldn't go home by myself. And the teacher would give me work to do. So one day he called on one of the students, the older students, and asked him a question. And he couldn't answer. So just to prove a point or to make him look bad, he asked me the question, and I happened to know it. And the teacher turned to the boy and told him, look at you. You will never become anything. All you want to do with your life is to play pan. You will not amount to anything. That boy is now Lennox Sharp. Some of you might know him as Bugsy. Very few of us would come as famous or renowned as Bugsy Sharp. And yet here's a teacher telling him he won't amount to anything. Now, bear in mind, that teacher was a great man. He was a really good teacher and he cared for us. He wasn't trying to in any way demean the man, the youngster. But the lesson I learned there is that it doesn't matter where you come from or what people think about you. It's what you think about yourself. And once you do something that you love and truly love, you can do it really well. At that time, I remember this because I grew up one street next to Bugsy. He was so small, he'd have to put up a box and for him to stand up on so he could play the pan. So coming from those humble kind of backgrounds, anybody can do anything. And I don't mean humble in any demeaning way, meaning that you didn't have the biggest school, the best school, you had a regular government school. And from there, I went on, and I was lucky, and Trinidad and Tobago has such a rich history, I don't know that we appreciate all of it. So I went to St. Mary's College, which is in downtown Port of Spain. And that was a tumultuous time. In 1970, none of you were born yet, but there was a big upheaval in Trinidad. that is now today known as the Black Power Revolution. But some of you may or may not know it, but the leaders of that were UB students who had come from St. Mary's College, a lot of them, and they started a protest at the cathedral downtown in Port of Spain. And at that time, St. Mary's was seen as the upper class school, the school of the rich and the mighty. But of course, government had opened it up. So what was happening at that time is Trinidad was changing. We'd come from independence with an expectation that everybody would do well, that the wealth of the country will be shared among all of us. The education will get us a better place. But that wasn't happening. And this was in the backdrop of what was called the Black Power movement in the United States as well. So there was social upheaval as today happening back then. So when there was trouble downtown during the day, we'd be told to go home, get out of town, be safe. And for some reason, some of us found ourselves in Woodford Square. We had a sense, and we didn't think of it that way, that something important was happening. We had to be witnesses to that. And that time and that change kind of created for me a sense of, yeah, there's something here that people need to get involved in. It gave me a sense of something to work towards, something better. And through school and through time, a lot of things changed that helped me to understand how to do that. One of the things we did is that there was this program on television called Know Your Country. It was a quiz competition between schools, high schools. And I was chosen to go up for my school, which is strange because Know Your Country was history, geography, and I was actually a science student. So we went on this show, and it actually, we had rivalry between science and modern studies guys. The science guys got excited about this. And we decided, some of us, we would walk around Trinidad. So 5 of us, the day after exams, it was A-levels then, walked around Trinidad. And it took us 15 days. And we learned this country. We met people, we saw places we would never have known living and growing up in and around Port of Spain. So it gave us a sense of a country with a purpose, that's something that we were all part of, and as I went on, I had different opportunities to get different kinds of jobs. And I remember at one time I was offered a scholarship by a company called Colonial Life. I had worked for them during the school holidays, and they liked how I worked, and the company offered me to pay for my studies if I got an A in A-level maths. And I had no idea what actuarial science was, or what an actuary was, but they told me this. They said, there's only one actuary in Trinidad, and he was making $30,000 a month at that time. I'll put that in context. At that time, there was a furor in the country because the government had bought a mansion for the Trinidad ambassador in Brazil. And the furor was the cost of the mansion was $100,000. And the country couldn't believe that the government could spend so much money on a house for a man. And here's one man making $30,000 a month. So here's this in front of me. I've been asked to make a choice to do this. And I said no. And I said no because naively, I said I wouldn't like that. I wanted to do science. So I made a hard choice. Was it the right choice? Should I have done that? I don't know. One thing I do know is that I don't look back with regret, but I look back with learnings. And what I learned is how well did I understand the implications of that choice? And quite frankly, I didn't. And why didn't I understand it? Because I didn't know what was involved. How could I have known? I should have asked somebody. Who could I have asked? I didn't know, but I should have found out. And that's the biggest learning, I think, that time and time again, I found out that there's always somebody who knows more than you about anything. What I've also learned is that the people who know the most are the most generous with sharing. And that's a strange phenomenon because you think that people who know the most might be too busy to share. That's not the case at all. So one piece of advice I would give you, and I'll give you examples as I go on. If you have a problem, find out who's the expert, the top person. Get in touch, however you can, and today it's easier. And that person will make time. I know this because this has happened to me all the time. So given that, I eventually decided, listen, I'll stay in science. And one day, a priest, Father Gold, the chemistry teacher, called 3 of us up to the front of the class, and we were like 30 students in the class, and said, you know, this thing called petroleum is going to get big. This is in the 70s. And he said, you know, you should look into it. So we took a walk down Frederick Street to the Ministry of Petroleum and Mines and asked 2 engineers about this field called petroleum. And they told us how exciting it was, how much training you would get, how well you would get paid, how much you would travel. And they said, this is great stuff. It's going to grow. You should get involved. But they said, whatever you do not work for the government. Why? Because they don't pay well. And there we were. It turns out the 3 of us got government scholarships in different ways. Alison and Leslie went off to do petroleum engineering. They went on to do PhDs and live overseas, professors, lecturers, researchers. I did geology, came back to Trinidad, worked in the sector, worked for the ministry, and learned a lot. But the one thing I learned from that, again, is that there are people there willing to give advice. You have to find them. And it's both Father Gold and these 2 gentlemen gave us some good advice. And interestingly, when I was in school, when we were in school, a scholarship came up from Amoco at the time. And I applied for that. And so I went for an interview, and I got a call after the interview from a gentleman who was chief geologist at the ministry. And he says, can I please come and see him at the ministry? So I said, sure. So he says to me, listen, we liked how we interviewed, and you've got this scholarship. So I want you to consider doing geology. So I said, okay, so what is that? So he tells me. So I said, fine. So I apply for this geology scholarship when it comes out, and I go to the interview. And the chief personnel officer in the government, who is the head of the government, the public service hiring, is in the room with a big panel of people, including the gentleman who asked me to do this. And he looks at me and he says, Mr. Paul, weren't you here about 3 months ago? I said, yes, sir. He said, now why were you here? I said, I applied for a scholarship. I said, what did you apply for? Chemical engineering. He said, now why are you here today? I said, I'm applying for a scholarship. What are you applying for? Geology. I said, Mr. Paul, don't you know what you want to do? So I told him, I said, to be honest, Mr. Cupid, I want to go to university. And I think I'm flexible enough. And these 2 appeal to me. So here's what he says to me. He said, Mr. Paul, you've got this scholarship in chemical engineering. You can't have 2 government scholarships. So you have to either take this one and leave us, or give up that one and try for this new one. So I said, with due respect, Mr. Cupid, I haven't been told formally that I have this scholarship. I couldn't tell him Mr. Scott told me. So he says to me, Mr. Paul, I just told you, that is official. But I said, but I can't decide so quickly. So here I am having to make a choice to change courses, and I didn't start it. So he gives me the option. He said, okay, go outside, have a sit, think about it, and we have some other candidates. Come back in when you're finished and tell us your decision. So I'm out there, absolutely lost. And a young lady who is the clerk shuttling papers between the meeting room and outside comes up and says, Mr. Paul, you've applied for this scholarship, and here are the rules. The rules are that once you qualify, you must be interviewed. And here's something else. They're looking for somebody to study geophysics, and you have the qualifications. Not many people do. So if you tell them you want to study geophysics, you have a better chance. So I go in the room, and I tell Mr. Cupid, he says, have you made your decision? I said, yes, I understand these are the rules, and I wanted to apply to try for this scholarship. Mr. Cupid gets mad, gets up, walks to the door, slams it, and walks out. So now I'm left to defend myself. The gentleman who invited me doesn't say a word. So what is the lesson here? The lesson here is that you have to make tough choices in life, and that there are people who are willing to help. And they're not always at the top or on the side, they come from all directions. So always look out for people, always make sure that you treat people well, they will treat you well. It turns out I ended up getting both scholarships at the same time, which was against the rules, but apparently the rules were not clear. So this is like me. There are rules, but the rules didn't have finite limits. So I was outside the limits of the rules, and I stepped in between the cracks. So that approach about building trusted people, getting along with people, working with people, helped me a lot. One other thing that happened in my life is after walking around Trinidad, I got to travel quite a lot for all kinds of strange reasons. You know, I went to university in England, then some friends came home for a holiday, got bored, took a Liat flight up the islands, went island hopping, then went back to England at the end of university, went to Europe, drove around in a car to like 14 countries. I did geology, so I had a lot of field work, so I was out in the countryside all the time. And that gave me a couple of things. One, the ability to feel comfortable in different places with different people of different cultures and different behaviors and get along with them. You had to. You couldn't go into a country area and spend weeks at a time and not get along with people. And that to me is one of the key things that you need for whatever you do. You guys are in university. And many of you are thinking, I'm studying A, B, or C. And these fields are filling up, or jobs are declining, or there's no jobs. So what do I do? But here's what I learned. Like I said, I learned geology. I learned geophysics. But I'm not doing geology or geophysics, but I'm advising governments who have oil and gas. And how did I get here? University prepared me. University does a few things for you. One, it teaches you to learn. And everything you do now, every job you do, things will change. You have to learn new things and do things in new ways. So learning to learn is the most important part of university. In addition to learning to work with people, learning to make new friends, work and trust people who you work with. Those things go through life everywhere. So I have children who are universities, I tell them, it doesn't matter what degree you study. It matters how you learn to study, how you learn to get along with people, how you learn to work. You know, and I've been lucky, like I said, I travel a lot, working, studying, playing. I've played cricket, and I play cricket, not a big time cricketer, but I've had a chance to go on tours to Mexico City, Argentina, playing cricket, you know, in exotic places, playing football in Brazil, teaching. I've taught classes in Cuba, in many places in Africa. So travel has been good to me. And I actually got the travel bug as a student while I was in school. Now, you might say it's difficult for you, given your circumstances, the way you're studying, where you are. And that is true, I have no doubt about that. And I met a young man in London once, a Trinidad guy, who's just out of university. And he told me he was working in China. I said, how did you get to China to work? What are you doing in China? He's teaching English. I said, but do you speak Chinese? He said, no, you don't need to speak Chinese. The way a language is taught is you speak the language to the people, and there's a structure to that. So he was working in China teaching English. A lot of that type of service is now available online. You can actually do it from your home on your laptop, training people in Spanish or in Chinese, or Chinese people learning English. So those are the kinds of things that you can think about. And again, I've been lucky to work with some great people who we did we created or made some changes that were small in nature, but had big impact. And I'll give you another example. At one time, and we all talk about this drop in oil prices and the impact on the economy and jobs. We've been through this before. In 1986, oil prices dropped, government cut public servant salaries, things were really bad. I was working at the ministry as an energy at the time. And we decided that the only way to move things forward was to get more work going in oil and gas. And we saw some opportunities in Venezuela that stretched over to Trinidad. But we couldn't get Trinidad and Trinidad back then to engage in it because their geologists didn't buy into the story, or they didn't have that approach. So in the ministry, we wrote a note to the cabinet saying, we believe this thing has interest. and we want to get companies to come and explore for it. And Cabinet agreed, and you will not believe it. We got Exxon, Shell, Total, Chevron, Mobil, the biggest oil companies in the world, interested in drilling on land in Trinidad for the very same rocks that are now the talk of the world in Guyana. Those rocks extend into Trinidad, but have to be under the land in Trinidad, as well as offshore. And we did some fantastic things to do that. One time, we just couldn't get information copied and printed fast enough for the companies. So I turned to the people in the ministry and we said, listen, this thing is going really well. We need to work overtime. Now, this is people who aren't getting paid. They had a salaries cut. And we said, when do we need to start? No, sorry, I said, we need to start as soon as possible. And they never asked me how they would get paid. They only asked me, when can we start? And it told me that people buy into an idea where they can feel they can make a difference. And they created this product that we could sell that got companies investing in Trinidad and changing the whole landscape of South Trinidad for several years doing that work. We did all kinds of things in the ministry. And that's one thing I wanted to keep in mind. People talk the government service bad, and it's difficult these days. I myself talk it bad these days. But here's the thing. When you go to a big company, which I've been into, all the infrastructure is in place, all the tools to work, all the technology, all the support services. When you work in a small company or a ministry with little resources, you don't have that. It means you have to be innovative and creative. You have to become a jack of all trades. You have to do all kinds of things. So although I was a geologist, I had to learn about taxation, about law. I had to work with the engineers and the drillers and understand that. That gave me a broad perspective, which suits me fine because as a geologist, I connect dots. I bring pieces together. So now I can take those things to governments and talk about how things connect. So today, for instance, I was talking to the people in the ministry in Mozambique here about how to do a natural gas master plan. What's involved in that? What are the pieces that go together? What is it that the companies say and do, and you say and do as a government? And again, I've had the great opportunity to work in areas where I wasn't comfortable. I didn't have the expertise, the knowledge, or the skills. And one time I was thrown into the United Nations law, the Sea Convention had been written, and there was a mining code to mine for minerals in the deep ocean. And Trinidad and Tobago had an expert, Mr. Lennox Bala, who was the head of a committee from Foreign Affairs, and I was chosen to go along with him as a geoscientist to work on writing these mining code. I didn't understand law. I didn't understand the law of the sea, but he made sure I learned. He made sure he put me with people who could help me do it. So I became knowledgeable in the law of the sea. I became knowledgeable on maritime boundaries. I ended up working on the negotiation of the Trinidad and Tobago Venezuela Maritime Boundary Treaty. So that learning I could take when I went to Tanzania. And there was an issue between Tanzania and Zanzibar next door to an island around maritime boundaries and oil and gas. So you pick up things. Like I said, my children accuse me of remembering trivia, but these little pieces help pull things together. It helps put things in context. You know, I speak about the times in government when we didn't have money. We couldn't buy things. I worked with the Nigerian government, and I remember working with the regulator, and at 4:30, the lights would go off. And we had to leave the office. But the lights stayed on in the director's office. And the guys were a little bit felt ashamed because they didn't have money to buy enough fuel to run the whole ministry or the whole department. So only the director had the electricity. And they were kind of, timid about it. And they said, when we talk to investor consultants and they tell us buy these computers and technology, they understand the challenges we face around not having power, for instance. But I could relate to them and say, back when I was working in the ministry, we would have crews doing work in the fields, drilling holes to find out where there was gravel. And for many years, we couldn't afford to buy tires to change on a Jeep. We couldn't get equipment for the men, but we had to pay them. So I could understand what these guys were going through. And that did something to them. They saw somebody who could empathize and understand their circumstances and build solutions that fit their circumstances. Now, in as much as we can complain in Trinidad about circumstances, situations, we can learn from them. And Kathy Ann and the people in the careers department will tell you, we spoke yesterday, and I give them grief about issues in UWI, in the way training is done. But it wasn't from a negative sense, it was, here are things I've observed that we can use, either to do better or help somebody else do better. And I plant these seeds in your head because I want you to start thinking about what you've done and how what you've learned can help you. Not just only in school, but beyond school. And again, the thing like I said, you build relationships. Those friends can take you through to life. I have friends who I was in school with who became leading lights in the industry in different parts of the world. Some in mining, some in oil and gas. And those helped me later on. So building trust with people is quite important. You know, when I left the ministry, I went to Petrotrin, I worked at Amoco, I worked with BP, I traveled to Azerbaijan, different parts of the world working with BP. You know, one of my proudest moments in my career is working on the last day I left BP. And I left BP to go into consulting into an open world. The last thing I did was to walk around BP in Trinidad to get a check and get it signed for $100,000 for the UWI Petroleum Geosciences program. We had helped UWI build that program, and we brought in teachers, equipment, on-the-job training, mentoring, but we hadn't given cash. And we got BP to commit $100,000 a year for 5 years. I was lucky to help design the petroleum program at UTT and help build that. So what I saw is that we had an industry growing that needed people, that needed to be trained well. You may or may not know it, but that petroleum geoscience program at UWI was putting out some of the best geoscientists in the world for several years. They would have gone on to lead major discoveries in oil and gas around the world. So the programs in there, we have lights of excellence. And I want to suggest something to you who may not have done it before. UTT has a maritime program and a campus in Chaguaramas. You should go visit that. That's a really excellent facility that can do some really good training. So we have those things in Trinidad. You may not find a way to use it, but you should know we have those kinds of things. And we have people like that. I remember when I was at BP, and BP just taken over Amoco, and we were changing the business. And I was offered a choice of 3 jobs. I was exploration manager looking for oil, finding oil and gas, and mostly gas. And we had a new country manager come in, and he said, Tony, we're reorganizing. And we're offering you a choice of 3 different roles. And I said, what was that? So the first one is exploration for deep water. And we think that's the future in Trinidad, and he wants somebody to lead that. So that sounds interesting. I've done exploration before. What's the second one? So he says, we're converting our business from an oil business to a gas business. So the infrastructure needs to change. All those tanks and pipelines, that's a huge multi-$100 million project that's going to take years. It's a big program. We need somebody to lead that. So I'm not an engineer, but I can certainly get my arms around that because I have to lead project teams in exploration, drilling, and so on. And then I said, so what's the third one? He said, we need to build this gas industry faster and bigger than anything Trinidad has ever seen. And we have a real risk that we will overwhelm the supply chain and destroy the companies who are here because they aren't big enough to do the work. We need to manage that. We need to make sure we build them up as we go along. So I said, what's involved in that? He said, I don't know. And I said, so you don't know what I'm supposed to do? You're asking me to do it. He said, yes. I said, I will take that. And he said, why? I said, because you give me a challenge. Now, I knew that I couldn't do what was needed by myself. So interestingly, the first person I went to speak to was somebody you wouldn't think about. It was a gentleman called Lloyd Best, who was an economist, who had written a lot about Trinidad's past failures of development and how and why we'd not developed, even though we'd been rich in oil, with sugar, and all these riches we had, we never developed beyond where we were. So I went to Mr. Best and said to him, Mr. Best, I have this challenge and I need your help. And he said, what do you want help with? I said, if we had another chance to develop Trinidad and Tobago and move it to the place you see we could have gone, what can we do differently? What should we do differently? And I spent hours back and forth with Mr. Best, understanding how he had saw the world and what he had learned from his years and years of research in the Caribbean and Africa. And that helped me get a sense of how we could use natural gas for development to change Trinidad. And here's, again, where I tell you, the people with the best knowledge are the ones who are the most generous. Lloyd Best gave me a lot of his free time, and that helped me create theories of change, ways to do things, is that the tools I use now to help governments from Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, Guyana, places all over the world, develop their countries from oil and natural gas. And I use that knowledge to change some of the ways BP worked and the way we address developing gas fields, the way we develop people. And part of that was the geoscience program at UWI. So I've learned a lot of these things. What I also learned is that when I was leaving BP, when I decided I would leave BP, I decided I would leave because I had worked 25 years in the industry. I'd worked for government, I'd worked for the state company, I worked for a multinational, but I never worked for myself or for a small company. So I decided I would leave. Now, you might think it's crazy, especially if you consider I had a wife and 3 children, 6, 2, and a newborn, and I was leaving my job. But I thought about it, and here's the reality. It was 2003, oil prices were booming, the demand for people and skills was very high. Companies were approaching me as a geologist to give me a green card, to apply for my green card to work in the US. So the market was good. I knew I couldn't fail, but I knew I had a chance to do something different. But again, before I went out, I sought help. And I asked people who were consulting and who were doing it, tell me, what should I think about if I make this step? And I get some good advice. And 2 of them I will give you. One said to me, Tony, people seek your advice and your help. Are you sure they're seeking your advice and your help or BP's advice and help? Whose brand are you selling? Don't fool yourself. And that was a good message. It says, don't let success go to your head. It could be wrong. And then another person told me this. He said, when you're consulting, you're trying to help somebody solve a problem. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in proportion. Listen to people and speak less. And that really helped me understand problems. So I say that, but I recognize that in my career, I've been very lucky. I've always been able to land safely, make changes. When I left the ministry, to Petrotrin to Amoco to myself, I've been lucky. And that travel, those experiences helped me take my skills and my services many places. I went to London, did some work with a group called Chatham House. From there, the World Bank hired me to do some work in Ghana. Then the Norwegians hired me to do some work in East Timor. And I went to Tanzania. So I've been to many countries based on building work and relationships. And I can't emphasize enough relationships. And every time I went somewhere, I learned something new. And I remind myself and I remind people every time they ask me, Tony, how do I get to be doing the things you're doing? I said, we all start at the same place. We all start knowing nothing. And if you remember that and you don't get overwhelmed, then you'll open yourself to learning. It's like a child learning to speak or to walk. that child will make mistakes and fall, but the parents or people around will help that child. And the same with us. So we have to remember to take chances. But there are people there to help you. But in the same way that people are there to help you, I want to tell you this: the more you share, the more you get. I have found that the people I work with call me back for help because they know if they ask me for help, I will give it. And I will give it freely. I've been blessed by people who support me, who give me knowledge, support, and help. And the more you give, I think the more you get. I have to say, I'm not by any means near perfect. I have some very strong views. I can come across as arrogant, and that I need to remind myself that there are virtues called humility and patience. But the reality is that, as time goes on, you change your behavior, you change your attitudes, But you have to learn yourself. The most important thing is to know yourself. When I was leaving BP, I called my mentor. There was a gentleman who would hire me to BP. And when he was hiring me, he asked me what I wanted. And I told him, I said, I've worked in the ground. I understand the operations. I want to know the business. I want to know how you make decisions, how you choose between different directions and different opportunities. I want to be in business development and strategy. I want to learn what makes the company think. And then he called me one day and said, Tony, something is happening. This thing called the dot-com boom is happening. And BP's CEO was a member of the board of Intel. And he wanted to move BP into that space. And they've created this group, this e-business group that is trying to take technology into the business and change the way we do the work. And we're looking to bring somebody into the team from the exploration and production side, the upstream side. At the moment, it's a bunch of consultants, people in refining, marketing, downstream. And I thought about you because you said you wanted to learn strategy and business development. And you're a geophysicist, you understand technology. So I said, fine, I'll do it. So I got an interview for this job in an airport in Miami because I was traveling to Colorado somewhere. And then I went to London for a second interview, and I was immersed in Silicon Valley, working with venture capital, with startups, with technology firms for several weeks, learning technology and e-business. And to tell you the truth, the things that we were doing then, the things that we could do in Trinidad and move forward, many of those things have not gotten off the ground yet. And this is 20 years later. Trinidad is still behind the 8 ball for technology and e-business. And you guys are young guys. I look around Trinidad and I say, where are the apps? Where are the tools? I want to go to the grocery. Why do I have to walk to see prices? Why does that turn up on my computer? I'm sure many of you don't always read newspapers. I don't, because newspaper is boring. It's not got good content. It's not quality. Where is that coming from? There's so many things I need. And I tell my children this, I say, we all complain. Many things aren't working. Many things aren't there. But guess what? Every problem is a business opportunity. Because you're not the only one facing that hurdle. You need to find a way to solve it for yourself and for others. So if you change your mindset about there's a problem to there's a solution waiting to be found, then I think you'll find ways to create jobs. Now, that's an important point, what I just said, because here we are discussing what the world of work will look like and how you will be able to fit into that world. What I'm telling you is that somebody has to create that new world. We hear the cliches all the time. We hear the world is changing. The future is not what it used to be. The world of work will be different. So what will it be? Do we wait to see, or do we venture out and create it? And I think you guys have an opportunity to change it because you have something that we didn't have. Our generation was blessed. We were born at a good time. The economies increased. Once you left school, whether it was primary school, secondary school, university, you would get a job in my time. That was almost guaranteed. Things were good. But we were all taught to be very mechanical, to follow prescribed rules, to work as individuals, not to share our knowledge, our work process, our skills. That means as a country, we couldn't go forward. We couldn't do better what we were doing. We couldn't grow. Growth comes from collaboration. Collaboration comes from sharing and trusting. Your generation is better at sharing information and knowledge than mine. But, and I'm sorry about the people from UWI in the room here, our system of education doesn't promote enough collaboration or doing things differently or having an opinion rather than quoting somebody else and kind of having a different point of view. If the world isn't creating a space for you to fit, shouldn't you work towards creating a world that you can fit, that fits you? That's the question I want to ask you, and I want you to think about. So I want to say, given all of that, given the experiences I've had, the fact, what I've tried to show you is that you'll always have challenges, you'll always have to make choices, you always have paths to take. People approach life differently. People set a goal and a path and follow that and do all they can to get there. I didn't do that. I had a sense of what I wanted to become or achieve, not specifically, but generally. And I would go down a road, and invariably those roads would take branches, and I had to make a choice, you know. And then I would choose based on judgment, information, support. And quite often the road wasn't necessarily the best one, but you make the most of it. You learn from it, you grow. But what I always got was new experiences, new learning, growth. So I want to take that and then say, given that I've just laid out for you that you have opportunities to think about the world, to learn from the world, then the question is, what is job market like in Trinidad and Tobago, in the region, in the world? And I'll go quickly into the oil and gas sector, because that's my area of knowledge, but that's the driver for the economy. And I will tell you that the information out there is neither complete nor accurate. What do you do? Who do you believe? How do you find out? So here's the information that's out there. And the question is this: do we have more oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago? But beyond that, does oil and gas have a future in this world? And for how long? And even if it does, and we have oil and gas, should we be using it? Should we not move our minds and energies to change that? And that's the question that you have to engage in. Because I will tell you this, the people making decisions, we're writing policies, we're putting these things in place, are not you. People like me, older people who should be getting out of the way, are making decisions for you. How do you become a part of the solution and not have a solution foisted upon you? That's what we have to consider. You have to put yourself in the minds and place of those young men in 1970 who took to the streets. I'm not telling you to take to the streets, but who thought about the issues and did something about it and tried to create change. And who did it through collaboration, through creating a common narrative that they can share and get people to buy into. Your job is to create your job. Nobody, I can ask you this question: who is the Minister of Education? And you can tell me. I can ask you, who is the Minister of Job Creation? You can't tell me. There's nobody responsible for creating jobs in this country. So how are you going to get jobs? You have to take things into your own hands. Yeah? And there are opportunities. Now, to get back to my question about oil and gas. Now, we all know there's a huge development in Guyana, and that'll be followed soon with Suriname. Guyana might be bigger, but Suriname is quite big as well. So there's a big growth there. These are countries with small populations, under 1 million each, having a lot of oil and natural gas. The reality is the industry has changed from my time, when you don't need as many people to do the things that the industry needs. It never did need a lot of people. I mean, the industry in Trinidad and Tobago, as big as it was economically, never employed more than 3% of the workforce. So it's not a big employer. In some communities it is. But it did generate revenue for the government to invest in training, in infrastructure, in services. And other jobs came out of that: construction, finance. So it created jobs. Now, if oil and gas has a future in Trinidad and Tobago, meaning we have more oil and gas to be found and produced, and the industry has another run, My view is the industry has the run based on two things. The resources, I believe, remain under the ground, both on land, offshore, deep water, and in terms of how long before oil and gas get turned into renewables in a realistic sense. I think there's enough there to create a whole generation of workers to take those jobs. Now, it's not a lot of people, but it can create good jobs in that space for 20 years, 30 years. That is reality. Unfortunately, that is not being driven by anybody really, in my view. I make no apologies for it. I work with the government. I know the government. I know how to think and work. So the question about, is there a driver for the economy using the traditional resource, oil and gas? My view is yes. Whether it's going to happen, my answer is not given the current shape in which it is being led. If you see a future in that or out of that, meaning that will create opportunities for you other places in the economy, then maybe you can do something about it. And people like myself are willing to help think about it. But beyond that, going quite differently into the blue economy, into infotech. In 1990s, 80s and 90s, when this whole IT boom started, it was young people with little resources, working in small spaces, doing research, creating things. That possibility is still there in the IT space. You can write software, write code, you can even design equipment, build it. It's easier now than it was back then. One, information is easily available on the internet, and two, we have more money now than we had back then. You may not feel so, but you have a lot more money now around the system. And the second thing is this: biotechnology is the new technology, in my view, that is in that space where you can use small amounts of money, small spaces, and do research and innovate and invent and create. And Trinidad and Tobago, in my view, is ideally located for that, both in terms of the systems for education we have, the potential for research, the climate, and the fact that we have an industrialized economy with technology, companies, people, process, know-how. So if there's not a move towards biotechnology, how do you get that move going? And I speak science because I'm a scientist. That's not the only space. I look at what's happening in the world. We look at what's happening in the United States now for elections, because what's happening with social media and how people are pulled in to behaving in certain ways. Google and Yahoo and all those companies hire lots of behavioral scientists. People who understand when you look at the screen what you will do, how to make you behave in certain ways. We have people being trained at university in psychology. We have people being trained in science. How are we marrying those two? One of the biggest things I was able to influence at UTT was to convince Professor Clement Imber, who was arguably helping build UTT, that if we're going to build an industry around aluminum and engineering, we must focus on design engineering. Because for many, many years, we had an engineering department that was entirely about operations and maintenance engineering, not design. And I give you an example. I said, we all remember, and some of you may be too young for this, Tantan and Saga Boy, and Peter Minshall's big puppets that were spectacular carnival that went to the Barcelona Olympics. And we all amazed at the creativity, but very few of us thought of the engineering that went behind those puppets moving. What made them rigid and flexible? What made them move and shake? What were the materials used, the dimensions used? That was engineering. If Trinidad and Tobago can leverage its design with its engineering, we have something to go off with. We are famous for the steel band. We talk about the steel band, but the steel band still has one shape, basically a cylindrical shape. Is that the only shape? Is that the ideal shape? There's all kinds of things we can do with engineering. But unfortunately, and apologies to you, we are constrained to teach people to pass exams and to teach them what we know. So we teach programs and we do research in what professors know rather than what the market needs. That is my humble view. I may be wrong. So how do we change that? You guys are in university. You guys are going to come out just now. You guys are going to be the leaders in industry and education and research. You may not think so, but I didn't think so either. But you get there. You do that. So you need to find ways to shape that. I've spoken for an hour. I've given you a lot of me, which is not what we came here for, but I'm not an academic, like I said. I could go and research and tell you, Mr. A said that, Mr. B said that, this happened in this place, that place. But I can tell you what I knew and what I learned. And I also learned from other people, and I share that with you. So what I really want to do now, which I really wanted, because I really enjoyed this, I really to understand from you, what are the issues that you need some clarity on, the things that I might be able to help you with, the questions you have. What are the things we can talk about that you can help me learn something that I didn't know? So I'll turn it back to Kathy Ann, the moderator. I hope that was a helpful introduction to the conversation.
Yes, 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 indeed. I have lots of notes, Anthony, lots of notes. And I know the students will have a lot of notes as well. And they do have some questions, which I'm going to pose to you. The first question is, looking back at your life, what would you have done differently?
That's a good question. I mean, I will always say this. I wish I had more fun. You know, I had a lot of fun. Yeah, but there are many times when, like, I'm here, I'm out in a country that is a beautiful country, 2,000 plus kilometers of pristine beaches, Indian Ocean, blue water, white sands. I haven't left town because of COVID. Yeah. No, I told a friend, I said, listen, things are so bad that I may not be able to come home for Christmas. I say, as a last resort, I say, my last resort will be a resort. I will go to a beach and stay on a resort. Yeah? But literally, because I've traveled, I've gone to lovely places, but I haven't been able to enjoy everything. I've had my time, I've gone on safaris, I've done things, but there's so much I have not seen because I have to work so much. It's the nature of the job. You know, you go there to a place short time. But I'd have had more fun. I would have also played more cricket, you know. I love it, and I stopped playing because I was traveling too much. But one thing I regret is not being able to read as much as I would like to. There's so much there. You know, I should have packed my trivia bag some more, but I haven't had a chance. But reading more, I think and it's one of the reasons I put those questions up there, to emphasize the value of reading, the gathering information, of using it. Now, why was the Panama question asked? Because when the discussion on the Petrotrin refinery sale came up, right? People were asking, what is the value of Petrotrin in the whole scheme of things? And if you look at when the government is trying to sell Petrotrin, the companies that bid for it weren't refining companies. They were companies who were in trading, who needed storage, who needed location. Point-of-Pierre was chosen as a location, as a refinery point, not because of the oil. Those refineries were never built to refine Trinidad oil only. They always import refineries. They were built because of location, access to North America, access to the Panama Canal. Ships coming from Europe pass between Trinidad and Tobago is a passage called Galleon's Passage. It's a major shipping route in the world. Ships pass there. They can come to Trinidad for fuel, they can come to Trinidad for repairs. We can create a maritime industry in Trinidad based on our geography. But we don't know our geography. We don't know that we are north of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal takes so much maritime traffic. And that's why we built the maritime school in Chaguaramas. I actually did the case for Professor Julian. How could we use the energy sector to create a maritime industry or help build on that? So those are the kinds of things we have to do. We have to see things and then see, what does that mean? How does that help? It may not come immediately. That's why I say the more I read, and I remember a friend of mine, one of my colleagues, we had a reunion from my high school, university days recently. And one of my friends told me after 40 years, he said, I remember standing on a beach in Cornwall somewhere, and you were looking at some rocks and some fossils. And he told me, he said, you telling me I prefer to figure things out rather than memorize them, And you don't, and I think that is the mistake of our education system. We teach people to memorize things rather than figure them out. And if you can figure things out, then you can find solutions when you have a wide sheet. And that is I think, the reading and getting information helps you do those things. You can connect things.
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you. Next question. Seeing as you went from considering chemical engineering to going into geoscience and to where you currently are given your expertise, it must have taken a lot to not only shift to these fields, but to integrate what you've learned from past fields into present ones. How did you do this effectively? What advice would you give?
Good question. Well, interestingly, when I was in high school, I did physics, chemistry, maths at those then A levels. So chemical engineering was the choice. But like I said, I really wanted to go to university, and I wanted somebody to pay for it. I couldn't pay for myself. So I was following the money, following the scholarships. Yeah. So chemical engineering came up, I went for that. Then geology came up, and that gave me a choice, because the chemical engineering was at UWI in Senegal, which was fantastic. But then the geoscience gave me a chance to go overseas. I've never been on a plane before, so I ended up going to the UK, to London to study. So that was the reason I chose that. That was one of the biggest drivers. And having said that, when I started to look for schools, I looked for schools in big cities, places that I can see things, learn things, have some fun. And of course, at Imperial, I played a lot of cricket. The grounds in England are so good, so it was really, so that was a great rationale for that. But going on from geology, geophysics, exploration, field development, I was learning new things. I was learning skills that are part of the business. Yes. And what I learned is that we are trained as technicians who are operations people. Now, BP and Shell and those companies aren't in Trinidad to produce oil, They're in Trinidad to make money. And we tend to forget that. Yeah? They aren't in Trinidad to produce oil, they're trying to sell oil and make money. There's a business part of it. And I discovered that when I went to London to work in this e-business team in London, I was very senior in BP, thinking that I'm a big man, I go in there, and I go to rent a house, and houses are very expensive in London. So I rent this house because I had a wife and 2 children and 1 newborn baby. And we go to this house, and it's owned by a young man who's a trader in BP, trading our LNG, reproducing, and he's making more money than the highest ranking person in Trinidad, trading what we produce. And we think we're big shots in this place. Yeah? And those guys are making more money selling what we put out of the ground. And so that is what I understood. I understood that as a business side. And I learned from working in the company that there's a part of this business that governments don't know. They don't learn, they don't understand, they don't value. And the outcome of that is that we were giving away value. We were getting a lot less. So for instance, I mentioned for 2 years, BP and Shell made no profits in Trinidad. Meantime, the LNG businesses were recording record profits. And Trinidad was a significant LNG producer. Why? They were shifting value out of Trinidad and putting costs onto Trinidad. They were playing the books. They were moving things around legally, right? But the government did not know that, didn't address that. And those are the kinds of things that, because having worked on both sides, I see how it worked. I know what they were doing and what the government was seeing. I know what the government was doing and what the companies were seeing. So I can now use that to advise governments. So I learned the operations, I learned the strategy from the e-business side, I learned the business development from my leadership roles in BP. I understood that. and I understood how governments work. So I understood the asymmetry of information, what governments didn't know, what companies knew. I understood how companies view the whole business in the country and outside the country, what the connections were, how the value of one place is transferred to another place, what one country meant to the business. So I understood from better than my government what other governments didn't know. As an example, we had a discovery that Mobile drilled south of Trinidad in the Columbus Channel has some small gas field. When it was found, we weren't interested in gas. Across the border, Amoco had drilled a gas field, a small gas well, but they never declared it to the Venezuelan government, because if they did, Venezuela would try to force them to develop it. So he had two companies who drilled gas on both sides of the border, and neither government knew the other side had it, but the company knew. Yeah? So those are the kinds of things that help me work with countries about how to get the best out of their resources, how to collaborate with your neighbors, how to understand where the value is. So the things I learned along the way help build a full picture that I could bring. I couldn't get that full picture if it worked in one role in one place.
Excellent. Those transferable skills and competencies. Next question, Mr. Paul. What are your thoughts on the future of sustainable technology? In which field or from what angle do you think sustainable technology will most advance Trinidad and Tobago?
It's a good question. I mean, technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Technology, as we know it, has different sciences that go to the root of the behavior of the sciences, right? Whether it's engineering, life sciences, and those pieces. But then you have the social aspect, the economic aspect. So we have to look at what are we trying to achieve. So it says sustainable technology. So I assume that person is talking about maybe fuels, maybe renewable energy, maybe biotechnology. So in my view, I would look at it from the point of view of where the value is, which is what I try to do all the time. Where is the value? And the value is defined by what you want from it. Do you want revenue? Do you want skills? Do you want development? So here we are saying we want sustainable technology. Do you want jobs? Yeah? So sustainable technology really speaks to, we don't have to take resources out of the earth that we can't replace. We can use resources and reuse them. So again, the base of that is the science, the research. How do you get materials of procedures or activities to happen without those non-renewable inputs? So like biomimicry, for instance, that takes animal coloring mechanism from plants or animals instead of dyes that are then biodegradable, that make plastics or containers that instead of plastic. So that is research. So that research then comes from engineering, chemistry, biology, for those different pieces. So that brings me to a pet peeve of mine at UWI. So we have these silos, these departments. Yeah? So how do we create programs that link them? But like I said, the sustainable energy of product has research, engineering, maths, chemistry, biology. It would have human behavior, psychology, policy formulation, right? Governance. So all these issues have to come together. So is there a program for sustainable development at the university that brings these disciplines in? I say that because my geophysics program was a joint undertaking between 3 departments at the University of Houston: computer science, electrical engineering, and geology. And we had a joint program. My son did a biotechnology degree in the UK. And that was a joint department between life sciences and engineering. So here's collaboration to enter new spaces. When I did it, geophysics was evolving in that sense. So you had to bring the sciences together. It wasn't a science of its own. So in the same way, I think sustainable technology is evolving, that brings together different disciplines. So to make it work, you need to find a space to bring them together. And the examples I've given you are two I saw where these new technologies or these new spaces are being developed through collaboration across disciplines. I've never answered the question, but I think everybody needs to have a core discipline, but they must be able to collaborate with others and learn and understand and speak to each other. You're muted, Katia. You're still muted.
Yes, I'm back. I was saying the complementary and supplementary skills that you could gain from other areas that adds to your core area of study.
Yep.
Another question, well, we have a number. I'm going to try to choose as many as possible. You said in moments of your career, you were put in positions where you didn't know and you sought knowledge from others to fill these gaps. Were there any individuals that were reluctant in any way to assist you?
You know, I learned something. And I learned that the people with the most knowledge, like I said, are the most generous.
Indeed.
If you hold back information, I've discovered over time, I'm not worth pursuing. If you have knowledge, you'll know one thing, that you can't use it all. And you would know that when you die, it's of no value. Indeed. So knowledge is of no use unless it's used or shared. Yeah, so if you don't share it, it has zero worth unless you can use it. And people who know a lot know they can't use everything they know. So they will share it. People who hold back don't know as much as you think they know or they think they know. That's my view.
Yes.
And it's not worth pursuing.
Yeah, I agree. And you always find, and we always tell the students as well, you always find that those people are very happy to share and to tell you their stories. So you learn a lot. Excellent questions coming in. Next question. What are your views on investing in stock in Trinidad? As a youth living in Trinidad, I know how hard it is to become part of stock investing. Please comment on this and any suggestion of companies to invest in and how to do so.
Yeah, sadly, in my view, the stock market in Trinidad has been a disappointment. It's not robust. It's not, the companies aren't aggressive. They're not transparent enough. And there's no space for growth. There's no new issues coming onto the market. Companies aren't offering renewal share offerings. And when companies go on the market, they're not entirely transparent. I remember telling people I'm an oil and gas. I did not buy into Phoenix Park when they put it on the market for reasons I know about the sector. And those parts were never divulged. Now people made money initially, but the whole thing, went in certain ways. So I think the issue I have is analysis. Where's the information to come from? Who's analyzing companies? Who's writing about it in newspaper, online? Who's talking about the markets? I mean, if you look at the foreign markets, you have a slew of people writing and analyzing companies. Who's analyzing ours? And that's not happening. So I would wish and I would suggest people invest in the market, but it's not dynamic. It's not growing. The people who grow are the banks. They make a lot of money, but are they making it? Are they developing the country with it? Are they growing the economy, or are they growing their shareholders' wealth alone? So you have to ask yourself, what are you in for? Are you in to make money or to make a difference? If you want to make money, that's easy. If you want to make a difference, you can use it differently. But I mean, as a young person, I would say the first thing to invest in is property. As soon as you can, invest in a house, so you have real estate. And I don't mean for investment's sake, but for growth. Because as you grow older, you have to find money to pay for a place to live. And one of the things that traditionally has appreciated the most over time has been real estate. Now, things may slow down now, but as a young person leaving school, I always advise people, as soon as you can, buy a house. Even if you think you can't afford it, sacrifice for it. Because in 5 or 10 years' time, you may want to go beyond that. And then you realize you can't pay for the house you need if you didn't have something to sell beforehand. So in this space, that might be something. But the reality is that in my view, the real estate market in Trinidad is overpriced. And that bubble, I think, has a finite life. You know, it may burst. You know, I've seen bubbles like this burst before after the 86 price crash. It took a while. Trinidad is very slow to react to reality. So that may come, but that's just my view. On the stock exchange, I would say I haven't played the stock market in Trinidad because it's not dynamic or attractive. So I would say, if I would tell anybody invest, I would say buy shares in the unit trust. Let them take the risk for you. But recognize you have to leave the money in for a while because they charge high fees. You might know it, but they charge high fees. If you put in $100 today, when you take it out, you get 100, you get 98 or 97 or 95, something like that. Yeah.
Excellent. Good advice. How do engineers go about being an influence to the government of Trinidad and Tobago to be involved in more renewable forms of energy?
It's a good question. You know, in 2010, I was asked by the UNDP to do some research to create a narrative, a strategy to help Trinidad to convince Trinidad government to move into renewables. And luckily, at the time, Trinidad had a path mapped out. We had a vision. That's called Vision 2020. And I tapped into that. And I said, we want to create this new world. And this world involves certain things, like research, like innovation, like technology. And I use my knowledge of science to come up with a narrative and to do certain things to help, for instance, research into biotechnology, like plants. So at the time, the magic crop for biofuels was jatropha. That's since moved on. You know, so using UWI's history as a biology research center to do some of that, you know, and those kinds of things. I would say, as an engineer to influence it, to influence policy, you must first identify what benefits you're trying to create. And then you have to understand this question, who is the one final person to make a decision to influence this, to make this change happen? Because ultimately, every good idea ends by the person who doesn't move it forward. So working backwards, who is the last person in the chain to make this thing work? And then figure out what is that person's drivers. What are the things that that person wants to do or make himself or herself happy? And then what or who influences them? So it is the key to any change is communication. And that's something we tend to forget. As scientists, as technical people, we write reports to speak to our peers. We don't write reports to convince somebody to take action. We convince somebody of the value of the action, but not to take the action. And it's quite different. And that's why I say it comes back to collaboration. You might be a very good engineer, but you may not be very effective at communication. And communication doesn't mean telling your story right. Communication means convincing somebody to do something, ultimately. And that means understanding that person. And that may be psychology, it may be human nature, it may be that person's social settings. And those are quite different. So again, if you're an engineer, understand what you're trying to do, understand who you need to engage to get it done, and find the parties to help you get that done, get to that person.
Indeed. The same thread you have been talking about, that networking, that relationship building is going to make the difference in this case. I'll take about 2 more questions based on our time. What advice would you give to an engineer finishing their degree at this point?
Finish it. Finish it. That's my advice. Finish the degree. Like I said, it doesn't matter what discipline you study in. It matters that you learn to study, you learn to learn, that you learn to complete tasks, that you learn to find out things, to read it, to communicate what you read, to collaborate, to do things. Do it and do it well. You know, you could go off tomorrow and work in architecture, in archaeology. You go off tomorrow and work in diplomacy. You can go off and do all kinds of things, but finish it well. And if you do work in engineering, do it well. So that when you go into another space, people will recognize you as somebody who's achieved something. You know, build credibility. Yes, you've done well, you've built credibility. People will then say, fine, I can trust, he's ticked the box, he can do things. So I can give him something else to do, or she something else to do.
Indeed.
So finish it, my advice.
Finish it, guys. You know, Anthony, we always say to them, in our words, your major is not your master. It's a set of skills, competencies, and abilities. Yeah.
And that's an important message I leave people with. What you leave university with is not only a degree, it's a set of tools that the degree certifies you have those tools. And you can use those tools in different things. You can buy a toolkit with spanners, screwdrivers. You can work on a car or a fridge. You know, you have a toolkit. You can do it in different spaces. Yeah.
Excellent. And our final question for you, Anthony. What motivates you?
What motivates me? Good question. I know. Okay, I look at today, for instance. So yesterday, the guys came and said, Tony, I do classes. Every Friday, I would do a class on some part of the oil and gas industry, whether it's law, contracts, geology, whatever. And yesterday, they came and said, Tony, we want to look at something different. I say, we have a natural gas master plan. It was written in 2014. Before you made all those gas discoveries, you just started to discover gas. Things have changed. Let's do a training session on how to build a natural gas master plan. What I can say. So last night I put together this program and I went in this morning. And after 2 hours, the response was, wow, my head has opened up so big. I'm now seeing things differently. You know, I saw a light coming on. You know, what motivates me is people doing things differently, people getting motivated to do their jobs because there's something I've been able to pass on to them. Just literally, I mean, and I'll give you another example. I was doing some work for the ministry in Ghana, and I had a meeting with the minister, and they were talking about the contracts and some wordings in the contract. And I told the minister, I said, do you know what that means? He explained what he understood. I said, what if I told you it meant these things instead? What if I told you if you said this instead, what I will do for you? And immediately he said to his lawyer, he said, every time this clause comes up in our contracts or our laws, change it to this. So immediately I had an impact. It was a small wording change, but a significant difference. And that to me was very impactful. You know, we had a similar situation in Trinidad where, again, when oil prices had dropped, we were trying to get companies to come and explore. And we put all the first deep water around. Now, I learned in my time in the ministry in Trinidad that when oil prices drop, it's a good time to get big companies to invest because of the way they think and act. And we went out there and we got again, the big companies, ARCO, Bass Petrol, BP, not BP, Shell, Exxon, to bid for deep water blocks. Not only that, we got them to pay cash bonuses of $100 million when the government was cash up front. But we had a problem. The problem was this. They told us that the tax regime in Trinidad will not work in deep water, but it's more expensive, the taxes is too high. So I told the minister this, and he said to me, so what should we change it to? I said, Minister, I don't know. He said, so how do we solve the problem? I said, well, it's a bid round. Then the companies tell us what they want to bid. And we created a matrix and asked them to bid. And when they started to compete against each other, every single bid came in. Besides the $100 million US in cash, every single bid gave us more taxes than the law had said we would get. Because the companies were pushing to do better, but the competition. So all we did here is a small change. We thought about how can we meet the investors' needs, but not give away the game. Let them. So that's what I've been able to do with people around me many times. Come up with solutions that aren't groundbreaking, but will solve problems. We had a similar problem when we were negotiating the Venezuela and Trinidad boundary treaty. Venezuela wanted to go out to the Atlantic because the law of the sea allows you to 200 miles from your shoreline, but you can go to beyond 200 miles if the slope, the sea floor is a certain shape. So you can go beyond that for another 300 miles. Venezuela would be locked in by Trinidad and Guyana if we had a boundary doing that. So they wanted to go beyond. So they came with this thing, they wanted to go to that point. And there was no way we could do it because we would lock in Guyana. And we couldn't do that, the CARICOM neighbor. So I suggested that we, instead of saying a line to this point, we said a line towards this point. So we didn't say where the line would end, we said the direction of the line. And that was that changed it.
Right.
We changed Asta to Asia, to towards. And that simple change. So the point of it is that you can create big change with small innovations. Yes. You don't have to think innovation means big things.
Wow. Anthony, I really, really want to thank you today for making the time out of your busy schedule. Students, we have gotten a lot of bits of really important information today, information that could really help us transition to pivot and be agile and make the changes that we need to. Remember, just some tidbits from Mr. Paul. He emphasized the importance of building trust and relationships with the people you deal with. Pay attention to those small things. You will have to make hard decisions and choices, but you have to make them anyway. Learn to learn. Take advantage of those opportunities. Take risks. Network, network, network. Seek out opportunities. Don't let success go to your heads. Build complementary skills for your area of expertise. Broaden your horizons. Know yourself. Ask the right questions. Grab opportunities with both hands. Take every problem as a business opportunity and also learn to learn. Yes? Great advice, excellent. So thanks again on behalf of the University, Division of Student Services and Development and the Careers and Placement section. Thank you so much for facilitating this session.